Alright, welcome back everybody. So this is going to be a pretty informal PowerPoint presentation on how to have a map pack in your mind. So what does this mean exactly? My hypothesis here is, does the kill feed give you meta knowledge about the game state that can positively influence the outcome of your raids? And we're going to delve deeper into that here in just a little bit. The learning objectives, so what I hope that you guys can take away from all of this is, what is useful information in the kill feed? What does the kill feed tell me about a player? What does the kill feed tell me about the game state? And how can I use this information to gain an advantage in my raids? So what is useful information? Useful information is pretty much anything that you can glean from the kill feed to help you have a better idea of what you're doing. This is going to be especially true now that the pregame lobby's going. Even whenever it comes back, it'll still help. It's just a little bit more important right now. Having a general idea of what classes and how many players are on the map can help you plan your raid. So what that's going to mean, I am a fighter main. I have always been a fighter main. And so if I see a lot of warlocks, I know that I'm already more or less at a disadvantage. And so that's not going to be a super optimal raid for me. It would be in my best interest to avoid PvP if possible. It's not always going to be possible, but planning my raid, I can avoid PvP heavy tiles, which is a whole separate topic for map knowledge at another time. And the weapon used in the kill can also help you glean that. Looking here in the bottom right, there's a couple of names here. We have Stabby Chef and 2 kills for back to the general chat, who I never saw him in the raid that this was taken from. But so let's see what we can do with that little section of a kill feed. So the first thing we can look at here is the naming conventions, right? These are typical tropes, and just a couple of them. Take note of these things and extrapolate on that information as you will. These are just things that I see pretty frequently. Stab type names or stealth type names are typically going to be a rogue. By the very nature of it, that's just what it is. You can get a good idea from the names. The fighter has a bowl cut, that's probably a fighter. Religious names like friars and templars and crusaders, all that kind of good stuff, those are probably going to be clerics. So that one's a little bit obvious. Use this to extrapolate. We can look at back to the general chat, and we can't really glean much from that name. Obviously we can look at his weapon of choice, the battle axe, and then that will inform us a little bit. So we can estimate that he's one of 2 possible classes, but there's no way to make that decision. I never saw him in this raid, I don't know. I would estimate though that he's probably a barbarian. Stabby Chef though, we can see that he's using a Chris dagger, so that's 2 good indications that this is probably a rogue. Sometimes it's really obvious. Fighter gear second. It's a fighter. Sometimes it's not so obvious. Looking at these, we can see Sneaky Goated. I was never able to locate that body, but it's probably a safe assumption that it might be a rogue. Vellum, Ghostface, Wonky Stonks, Scary Man, Humble Farmer, Wonky Stonks, but like again this time, there's no information we can get off that. Maybe if you read really deeply into those names, you can maybe make some type of connection, but that's why you're going to have to look at the weapon of choice. We can see that Vellum is using a longsword, which narrows it down to 2 classes. Bardacian's Vihander are also narrowing it down to 2 classes. Typically, a warlock isn't going to be using those weapons. It's probably a barbarian. Those are 2 very different classes, but that's still better information. A quick comprehension check. If you saw this name in the kill feed, Sir Havel, what would you estimate that this player probably is? Now, it's a little bit hard to glean a lot of information off of that one, but he does have Sir, and so I estimated that he was a fighter. He was in fact a fighter, and a PDR one at that. So that's a very nitpicky example, but you can use this general concept to find more information. So we can look here again at Stabby Chef, and he was a rogue. I did find that body, and we're going to come back a little bit later and discover how exactly I was able to find this corpse. So what can I learn about the game state, and why should you care about the game state? So this is probably a more important piece in my opinion. Everything in the dungeon is dangerous, and players are the most dangerous thing in the dungeon. Any mini-boss can be cheesed, the average monster isn't that bad, bosses can be completely avoided. So if we see the same name or names populate most of the kill feed, that's a good indication they are there to fight and they're good at it. You have to estimate your ability against somebody that might have 4 to 9 possible kills. If my objective is to survive the dungeon, I probably don't want to take that fight unless, based on the name and weapon of choice, I can glean that I'm a good matchup. In which case, it would be a good idea for me to beat him. Because if I were to beat him, players naturally have the best loot. The average player is not going to pick up trash. A lot of players are going to carry around a lot of weird things, cracked sellables and random white items and whatever junk they just so happen to have accumulated. But in general, the average player is going to have greens, uncommons, definitely anything better than that, they're going to have picked that up. Those types of things and things that a player like yourself would want are probably in their inventories. So they are the most valuable loot container on the map. They have sellables, they have gear that you can take. On top of that, if a player is dead, they're not a threat. And so if you're looking at a kill feed with 7 or more names, it's a safe assumption, depending on how much time is left in the match, that you might be alone, or at the very least, the probability of you finding something is very low. If you're going to hell, you probably want to be alone, and if you're looking for PvP and you see a lot of kills on the kill feed, that's a good time to go ahead and just leave the dungeon, because you're not going to find much else. It depends on what you're looking for, so this information can go both ways. I personally use it to estimate whether or not trying to make a boss attempt is worth it. If you're looking for PvP, that's your own prerogative. Use this information for what you will. So let's look at the game state a little bit more. Here in the top right we have a kill feed with a skeleton archer killing Felon. Really tragedy how that one happened. A skeleton swordsman killing the second gentleman there, and a demon centaur killing Sir Havel. Peace be upon him. He fought very bravely. I watched the fight. He did very well. Skeletons, goblins, kobolds are very common, so it's hard to get any information off of that, right? Obviously, the more specific of that skeleton, the easier it gets. Skeleton archers are not in every single tile. Skeleton footmen, axemen, spearmen, swordsmen, the shield guys whose name escapes me, they're in just about every tile on the crypts. Same thing for, a goblin archer, a goblin, bolo slinger, those types of things. They're very common, so it's hard to pull that information. You can figure out a little bit, but it doesn't narrow down a ton. Now, mini bosses are not in every tile, and when I use the term mini boss here, I'm going to I'm going to use that a little bit loosely. In this particular instance, is a Demon Centaur, which on the particular map that we generated for this raid, there's only 3 on the map. So in this particular raid, I spawned in the bottom right. Sir Havel, he spawned in the top right. So, irrelevant of me knowing that one of the 3 potential spawns, or not potential, one of the 3 places that a centaur could be was not the one because I had that spawn, and that's where I was. I would have seen him. I know that there's only 3 places he possibly could have been. Now, similarly for a berserker, there's more places that could be. For skeleton mages, I believe there's only 4 places that could have been. But see, being able to narrow it down from effectively 8 tiles down to 3 is going to help me locate that corpse, right? It's a good rule of thumb if you're looking for those bodies. So we're going to do another little comprehension check to make sure everybody's still tracking the information here. If a player dies to a skeleton footman in the crypts, where could you estimate that they are? And this one is pretty obvious. They could be anywhere. Pretty much anywhere. There's so many of them in so many tiles. If you were the absolute best at map knowledge, and you know that there's no skeleton footman in the pyramid, then that's valid. You can use that information for a little bit. You can base it on how much time is left, you know, the player spawns, all that kind of good stuff. But the answer is effectively, they can be anywhere. So let's look at the Goblin Caves Skeleton Mage. If a player dies to a skeleton mage in the Goblin Caves, where are they? Well, there's like 3 places that could have happened. There's a spawn in the bottom left there. There's a potential spawn for one in the Cyclops room. And then there's another guaranteed spawn over in the spider room. You guys know the one? Those are the only places that could have happened. There's no other skeleton mages on the map. So it's a very good indication. And these are spaced out, sure. Not that it's a hard travel time, but if your objective is to get as much gear, loot, whatever you're looking for as possible, these are 3 good places to find, because one of the best possible loot containers is in one of these 3 rooms now. So you can use that as a metric to estimate. This next one's a good bit harder, but we're going to talk through it. So if you're in the Ice Caves trios, specifically, and 5 players populate the kill feed in a short amount of time, with 1 player dying to a Yeti, what can you infer about the game state? Okay, so there's a lot of pieces here. The Ice Caves trios, the Ice Caves is just that I can use the Yeti as the example here. 5 players have just died, so in the kill feed, imagine there are 5 names that just popped up in the last 30 seconds to a minute or so. And 1 player was killed by a Yeti. Well, you don't see a 6th name, so it's probably likely that a 3v3 occurred and 1 of the characters survived. And you know approximately where these bodies are. Depending on where you're at on the map, you can check them all, or just check some of them, do what you can, but the Yetis spawn pretty close together, so out of this entire map, you can estimate that there are 5 of the best loot containers on the map in 3 tiles. And that's good information. They probably would have selectively found good items. You know, there's a weakened Yeti, there's 1 weakened player, and if you're in trios, a 1v3 is very rarely a fair fight. So using that information will help you to find these corpses, know that you can push them, and take that loot. And that's effectively leading into how can you use this information to gain advantage in your raids. So if you're in duos and trios, multiple names populating at the same time would indicate that a whole team might have been eliminated, or that a fight has just occurred. This is a good time to third party, especially if you use your audio cues and generally locate where this fight could be happening. You don't need to hear the whole fight, even just little bits from a distance can still let you know that a fight is happening. You track how many people have been eliminated, and then estimate about the right time to push. This is that effectively having ESP in your mind. These are two very different things, but it's a good principle, right? It would make sense that you wouldn't want to join that fight and then have 3v3v3 when you could have a 3v1, 3v2, something like that, or even a 3v3 where the other team is already weakened. That's going to help increase your chances at being able to take their things. If multiple names are populating with some PvP deaths intertwined, this ties back to the location principle, where you can put them together. It helps you identify roughly where this fight could have occurred. That's not always going to ring true, but it's a good indicator, generally speaking. So my conclusion here, from my experience, reading what PvE is killing players is a good tool to find corpses or find other players. If you're in duos or trios and one person dies to a more unique mob, those mini bosses, the mages, something like that, it's a good indicator where another player might be for you to attack that player. Seeing what names and weapons or spells are on the kill feed can narrow down the possible PvP encounters that you might face. What this is saying, once again, if you see somebody is using a stiletto, it's probably a good indicator that is a rogue. If you're a mage, any caster class really, then you know that's not a great matchup for you. You gotta be safe there. If I see people getting kills with, Curse of Pain or something like that, I don't want to take that fight, so I would play more cautiously. Just knowing what weapons people are using can give you a lot of information about what possible class they are, and especially if they have multiple kills with multiple weapons, because it's just two different filters. If you see that a Falchion got one kill, and then a Castilian Dagger got the other, that's likely to be a Slayer fighter. Because I don't think there's two classes that can use both of those, outside of Fighter and Bard. But a Bard probably wouldn't be using that. That's a little bit more of needing the game knowledge, but it's still a pretty solid indicator that that's probably a Slayer fighter. Unfortunately, the picture was lost, but I ran into one gentleman, and he had 2 kills in the kill feed, one with a rapier and one with a stiletto. And so I was estimating just off the name, because he had John in the name, no H, that he was probably a cleric. Well, then I saw that he had a rapier, and then I saw that he had a stiletto, and then that all led me to assume he was a rogue. He was not. I found him and had a brief exchange with him, and then I was unable to get the picture. But he was a Slayer fighter. Anthony Rogue killed us both shortly after. It was a little tragic, but the rogue played very, very well, and I missed every single shot with my bow. That already kind of ties up into this third point here. Use that information to avoid bad matchups. I don't want to take a Warlock fight. As a fighter, I don't have the tools for it. With that gentleman earlier with the battle axe, the back to general chat, fighters are good against barbarians. That's a fight that I would want to pursue. And seeing that he already killed 2 people means that he probably has loot on him. I never found the corpse, but he probably had good loot on him. You can also push weakened teams or scavenge loot from a team fight. So all this tying back to my hypothesis here, does the kill feed give you meta knowledge about the game that will positively influence your outcome of your raids. In general, yes. Not 100% of the time, but generally speaking, yes, it will. Assuming you have that deeper level of game and map knowledge. If you know where these monsters are, a skeleton champion in the crypts, a goblin mage in the goblin caves, the yetis or the berserkers, it gets easier to pinpoint where these things are. Knowing what classes can use what abilities, all that kind of stuff. Knowing that if it doesn't show a weapon, it's probably poison or rupture, one or the other, or druid. Being able to gather that knowledge off of these things, very useful stuff to culminate in knowing what you're probably up against. So, brief summary here. What is useful information? Names that can identify classes, and the potential builds you can expect. What does the kill feed tell me about a player? Are they a streamer? What class are they probably playing? What attacks are they probably going to be using against me? I can see if somebody's getting falchion kills, I know it's a falchion. There's a TTV somewhere, I know that it's probably a streamer. Use that information for what you will. What does the kill feed tell me about the game state? About how many players are left and where the loot might be. What areas might be clear. How can I use this information to gain an advantage in my raids? It helps me take better fights and avoid bad matchups, avoid or find PvP in lower floors and in the first floors, and to generally generate more loot by looting those good corpses. So that's kind of the video in a nutshell. Anybody whose name I used in this video, if you want to reach out, I am more than happy to talk to you about whatever. I just did a couple of raids to get a couple pictures. The raids in particular aren't necessarily the highlight here. I got killed by a skeleton archer. I killed one cleric. It's about what happened. So hopefully this information will be useful to somebody. Probably those advanced beginners or early intermediate players who are looking for that next level of game knowledge on how to improve. This might be useful for you. So if anybody has any questions, comments, anything like that, please leave them below. I'll do my best to answer what I can. And thank you all for watching.